Welcome to Built to Go, a Van Life podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Wagg, coming to you from the College of Curiosity. This time we're going to talk about keeping calm and carrying on. With all that's going on in the world today, it's easy to take your eyes off the prize, but you have to keep your eyes on the prize to get to the prize. We're also going to talk about some really unusual news stories this week, and we'll have a tech talk about when you are ready to go do the things. Is your van built enough? Probably it is. And a product review of a very good security device that I've been using for quite a while now. Hey, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me here once again for episode 218. It's been a week. It's been a week, yes. Remember, no politics, no religion, right? And yet, politics is a little hard to ignore right now, because in the U.S., things have fundamentally changed, perhaps forever. And I'm not going to go into that in any depth. There's different opinions on it. Some folks say this is the end of the world. Some folks say it's just a clarification. Whatever your opinion on it is, it doesn't really matter, because what matters is we're kind of being consumed by politics. At least I am. You know, maybe you're somebody who can ignore politics, and I honestly don't want to follow politics that much. I'm just genuinely concerned, so it kind of creeps in. And what I'm going to tell you here today is, it's okay to live your life. Now, are politics important? And regarding van life, I mean, you know, one of the things that just came out in the U.S. was that in many places now it is illegal to be homeless. The Supreme Court said that it is okay for localities to make homelessness illegal. That translates to sleeping in vans pretty quickly. So it could be illegal for you to sleep in your van in many communities now. That's an example of politics kind of interfering with our lives directly. But what about the rest of it? What about all the little nitty-gritty stuff that goes on in Congress and all the little infighting and the crazy characters on both sides who are always trying to get the microphone and get attention? Do we need to pay attention to that? Well, we don't need to. I mean, you could argue that it's good to, you could argue that it's not good to. I don't care about that. What I care about, for the purposes of this podcast, essentially, is van life. My goal here is to enable you to get out there and do what you want to do. And if politics or paying attention to politics is getting in the way of that, we need to have a talk. And I think the best approach to this is what the British did during the Blitz in World War II, which was they had these signs that said, keep calm and carry on. Now, I have read enough history to know that that wasn't exactly what was going on in Britain during World War II. There wasn't a whole lot of keeping calm or carrying on, but the sentiment remains. You have a life to lead, and there may be obstacles in the way. There may be bad things going on, but that doesn't mean you should stop living your life. And here's a perfect example. Tomorrow, as I record this, is the 4th of July, Independence Day, the most patriotic of holidays in the United States, although arguably Memorial Day should be more patriotic, but we'll put that aside. This is the day that everyone's flying their flags and exploding fireworks and barbecuing and being outside and gathering with family and just having a great old time. Yay, USA. And yet a lot of people in society feel like there's nothing to celebrate right now. Their day is ruined. They will maybe go to something, but they're going to be kind of morose about it, and they don't want to gather with people because the talk is going to lead to politics, and it's going to ruin the thing for them. And that's kind of too bad. And it doesn't matter. All that weight they're carrying, all that angst, all that guilt or fear or anger, whatever those emotions are that come from paying attention to politics, don't do anyone any good. They're not making things better. Your anger, your remorse, your regret, whatever that feeling is that's coming from our current political situation, is not helping that political situation. It's not helping you. And we really need to move past it. Now, I'm not saying to ignore it. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying you shouldn't vote. I'm absolutely not saying that. You should do what you can do to influence politics the way you want them to go. But to be all consumed by it, which is the trap I find myself falling into from time to time, is foolish. It's foolish, it's counterproductive, and it isn't going to help you have better van life or any other kind of life. What is more important is accomplishing your goals, living your life, and I think the bottom line is if you're ever in doubt about what you should do in times like this, the one thing you should do is focus on kindness. That's right. What can you do to be kind to someone today? And that includes yourself. Just take a moment, step back. Realize that national politics takes a long time to trickle down to local politics. Now, that's not universally true. Some groups are affected immediately. There's certainly a lot of that going on, and I am definitely speaking from the privileged place of the middle-aged, mediocre white male. I understand that. But for the most part, national politics isn't really going to affect you as much as local politics. So its importance is a little bit less. Again, pay attention, but don't feel like it is the most important thing in your life. And one of the reasons for that is you just don't have that much control over it. There's not much we can do to influence national politics as an individual. We can be part of movements, we can vote, we can join parties, we can canvass and call people and do all those things if we would like to. But they're mass things. They're things that groups do, not individuals. And if it's a burden on you, if it's ruining your life, in short, it's okay to take a step back. So one of the things I'm doing, or I can't do this year because of timing, but I did last time there was a major election, is I became a poll worker. Because to me, that was the way that I could help solve the problem of our political situation the most directly. And did it solve anything? No. I just knew that there would be at least one honest person at the polls who was paying attention and who would do appropriate action. And that was me. That's what I did. And I worked at the polls, and everything was fine. It was completely normal. Although it was interesting because working at the polls informed me about what was going on with all the claims of irregularities at the polls. There were a lot of people misinterpreting a lot of stuff, and I knew what it was because I was there. So consider that. Poll workers are in high demand, and it's difficult to be a poll worker. You have to go through some training. It's a very arduous day, and sometimes poll workers get attacked, not so much physically, but they get accused of things which they're not responsible for. So if you think you have the strength to do that, and if you feel like you need an outlet, absolutely consider being a poll worker, whether it's a judge or just a regular worker or just helping people come in the door. There's a bunch of different roles you can fulfill. Contact your state's voting service, whatever it may be, to learn more about that. The other aspect of this is, how do you deal with other people? I live my life in two different places. Basically, in the course of a week, I spend half my week in a place that's extremely blue and half my week in a place that's extremely red. So I'm living in both worlds. And not to talk about politics too much, but I can tell you I do not align perfectly with either one. I have quibbles with both sides, some stronger than others. The way I have handled this is that I just stop talking about politics with people. I have my own group of friends and I'll talk politics with them. But in general, if I'm just with a group of people or at a bar and there's a random conversation coming up, I'm not going to engage in any political discussion. I'm just not, because it's not going to do any good. I'm not afraid to defend my position. I would love to encourage people to think the way I do, but I know from long experience that those are not the circumstances that are likely to be productive. So if somebody wants to have a genuine conversation with me about what I think about politics, I'm happy to have that. But most of the time, these casual political conversations are fraught with danger and not worth having. So when I'm traveling and the topic of politics comes up, I simply say, oh, well, I don't vote here, so I'm not really involved in this conversation. That's an easy way to get out of it, and I've never been pushed back on that. And when I'm home and when it matters, I'll state my position. And that has given me some level of calm. Another important thing to do, and I find this really hard because I'm kind of a news junkie. There's a difference between being a news junkie and being a politics junkie. There's a lot of news out there, but unfortunately in election years, the news is dominated by politics. I remember back in 2016 when I started turning on the major news networks, the cable news networks, I was really surprised that they weren't covering the news anymore. And that's true for all of them. It used to be that if you watched CNN or MSNBC or Fox or any of those, you would see like the day's news, and some of it would be politics. But somehow that changed. Somehow in the late 2000s or 2010s, it became all politics all the time, and that surprised me. And now I feel like I don't have an outlet for just news, so I force myself to turn them off. I spend a lot more time listening to podcasts and audiobooks and even old-time radio. And being addicted to this news is bad, as most addictions are, because you will always feel this angst, and you also feel like if you're not listening constantly, you're missing something. You're missing something. It's important. Oh my, something's happening. You're missing it. What are you going to do? And the truth is that if you turn off the radio and the TV and turn that stuff all off for a week, when you come back at the end of the week, you haven't really missed anything. And I've had this experience many times on trips. There have been lots of times when I've gone on trips and had to be cut off from all media. And when I come back, I'm like, I didn't miss anything, did I? There was a whole week that nothing happened. And the truth is that most weeks, nothing happens. You do not have to stay that connected. So I'm sorry for the rant, and I'm sorry about talking about politics so much, but it's on everybody's mind. It's a big deal right now, and I just wanted to set a perspective that you're welcome to latch on. It's important, but it doesn't have to be all-encompassing, and you have other stuff to do. Don't forget to do it. Live your life. No matter what happens, you're not going to regret doing that. Thanks very much to Kent once again for buying me a gallon of diesel at buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. There are no advertisements in this podcast because folks like Kent and the folks who donate every month keep it that way. And I like it. I think you like it too. So if you'd like to help support the show, go ahead and visit buymeacoffee.com/built-to-go and buy me a gallon of diesel. And we will sally forth. Van Life News. Kind of an odd bag this week. I ran into this article on Outside Online, which is, I think, part of the Outside magazine that's been around forever. And this is a magazine geared towards, like, hikers and tent campers and people like that. And they've always had an uneasy relationship with van life because some folks feel like it's cheating. You're not sleeping in a tent. Well, that's not camping. And, well, whatever. They can define camping however they'd like. Maybe it's something else. I don't care. It's what I want to do, so I'm going to do it. But somebody wrote an article in the latest issue, and they kind of have like an agony aunt, a Dear Abby column in the magazine. It's called Sundog's Almanac of Ethical Answers. And the question asked to Sundog was, why are we so annoyed by remote workers in Sprinter vans? Which is an interesting question. And they go on to say, and I'm going to read the entire paragraph, and this is written by, I kid you not, Mom Against Douchey Drivers. And Mom says, Dear Sundog, I was looping through a campground looking for a spot and found them not only full, no big surprise, but filled with Mercedes vans whose occupants were typing at laptops, buds in ears, even a few satellite thingies mounted on roofs. In other words, they were working. It felt so unfair that the very limited number of sites which are maintained with our tax money for people on vacation were now subsidizing cheap rent for van life. Shouldn't telecommuters be banned from public campgrounds? Yeah. Did you know that van lifers were thought of that way? Like we're, taking up public lands and we're not paying taxes. And well, anyway, that's one of the perceptions folks have about us. And Sundog addressed it, but you might not be too surprised to realize that he kind of agrees. He says, Mad, your query is notable, less for the offense, but for the offender. In a mere decade, van lifer has won a spot among epithets like yuppie, gentrifier, and Californian that signify the easy-to-hate villain in any story of rapid social change. Yeah, Well, folks, I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's actually pretty long. There's a link to it in the show notes. But he basically goes on to say that we're a problem. We're out there with our $150,000 vans taking up all this space and, being all uppity about how much our lifestyle is wonderful and everything. And at the end, they say that due to lack of federal funding, the result, and I'm going to quote this, the result, fewer campsites, higher fees, and more traffic jams in parks, which leaves your average weekender out of luck, while handing over the jewels of nature, more remote, less regulated, to Brosephine, and their magnificent machines. So, Outside Magazine does not appear to be a fan of VANLIFE. This article is written by Mark Sundin, who is known as Sundog, and, you can write to him if you would like. His email and everything is on the link in the show notes. But that's from Outside Magazine. So, not everybody loves us, sadly. But I have to say that as a van lifer, there are other stereotype groups that I am not a fan of either. And a lot of them are found in campgrounds. So we're actually not the ones taking up the campgrounds most of the time. We're the ones not in the campgrounds. And anyway, I don't want to get too defensive here, but that's a thing that you can read. Next, and I'm sorry we have to talk about this, you may have heard that a couple weeks ago now, at the Grand Isle rest area, I believe it was westbound in Nebraska, there was a brutal attack of a couple who had an RV parked there. It was at 7 a.m. in the morning, and they were in an RV towing a Jeep. And some young guy demanded that they give him their Jeep, and when they said no, he chased them into their RV and stabbed them. He killed the man who was 72 and brutally stabbed the wife, who I think was about 70, and last I heard she was in critical condition in the hospital. This is a horrible story, and my heart goes out to them and their family, and I really hope that she recovers. Just a terrible, terrible story. The culprit stole a Ford Focus or had one with him and drove off and actually ended up in the Platte River and was captured. He's in jail, so at least we've got that. But what a horrible story. And I knew about this last week, but I didn't report on it because what does this have to do with van life? Nothing, actually. But now a lot of the YouTubers are on this saying, see, folks, it's dangerous out there. You got to protect yourself and blah, blah, blah. And, it's just not. I'm just going to say it. It's not dangerous out there. Yes, this thing happened, but think about it. It was 7 a.m. at a rest area, and this is a big rest area, and this happened, but it wasn't anything anyone could have predicted or done anything about. There was a crazy person with a knife there, and that can happen anywhere in society. So, yes, this is scary and horrible, and you wouldn't want to have it happen to you or anyone you know, and you would like to take steps to prevent it. But you can't. You can't take steps to prevent something like this and live your life. So, I'm letting you know that in case you didn't hear about this, that's my stance on it. I do not think this impacts van life. I do not think it's anything you need to be prepared about. It's just a tragic story, and I hope the woman survives and somehow gets over this, and I hope the man gets the sentence or possibly medical treatment that he needs. Finally, you may or may not know that the hashtag VANLIFE, where'd that word come from, VANLIFE? Well, VANLIFE has been around a lot longer than this word VANLIFE, but the man who came up with hashtag VANLIFE, who lived in a van full-time, is Foster Huntington. And ISPO ran an article or an interview with him asking what he's doing now, and then it turns out he's not doing van life, although he kind of is. The article goes on to explain his stance is that van life isn't about living in a van literally. It's about being active and doing things. And what he's focused on right now is actually building and living in tree houses. He still hits the road about 2 months a year, but he's no longer a full-time van lifer. So I just thought it was an interesting perspective on what type of people are drawn to van life and why van life may not be their end goal. And I've said this all along. Van life might be temporary for you, and that's fine. it's still something to celebrate and give a try if you're interested. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes. It's at ispo.com. ISPO appears to be some sort of a sporting organization. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but you can research it at the link in the show notes. Tech Talk. So, big question about tech is, when is your van done enough so that you can actually head out on the road? I mean, I've said many times that your van will never be 100% done. I mean, my van is getting pretty close, but I still have a list of things I need to do. The Scamp is less ready now than it was when I took it out to Colorado. You know, the Airstream doesn't count, and Tiki Bago certainly doesn't count, but you get the idea that you're never going to be completely done. There's always going to be projects. But when are you done enough that you can actually hit the road? And I'm going to tell you a story here. I have a friend named Scott. I don't know if he listens to the podcast or not. It doesn't matter. But he and I started doing the van life thing about the same time. And I have been all over the country since I started this van life thing, often in vehicles that weren't complete. They were often deficient. The NV200 I went through several iterations. The first time I head out and drove about 2,500 miles, it was literally just a metal tent. There was nothing in it other than some boxes and a cot. But I did it. I went out and did all those things. I did the van life. My friend Scott is a bit of a perfectionist. He spent months searching for exactly the right vehicle, finally found it, and is meticulously going through the vehicle, cleaning it, making it exactly the way he wants, designing the electrical system that he built himself. He actually built his own batteries, and he has a fancy articulated bed and all this, and it's been 4 or 5 years now, and he's not done, which is fine. But he hasn't actually done much. He wants to be done before he hits the road. Now, he's done a few little trips, but he hasn't really done a whole lot of van life. He's a very generous guy with his time. He's always helping other people with their builds, and I'm certainly not going to shame anybody for taking a long time with their build. That is not what this is about. The point is that perfection is the enemy of good enough. And if you're going to focus on perfection, you're never going to get out there and do the things you want to do in van life. So when is your van done enough to do what you want to do? And the answer is simple. It's when it can do the things you want to do. Now, not necessarily all the things, like maybe you want to go camping and you want to have a very comfortable bed and a refrigerator, but you haven't purchased the refrigerator yet and you're not entirely happy with the bed. Does that mean you cancel your trip? Does that mean you don't go to Van Fest or School of UP or wherever you were planning on going because your van's not done? I hope not. I hope you'll realize that good enough is good enough, and you can go and enjoy these things. Because I'll tell you that all the things I've done in my van, the focus ends up not being on the van, hopefully. If you break down on the side of the road, that's another story. But hopefully the focus isn't on the van. The van's an enabler. The van allows you to do things. And think of your last trip when you flew in an airplane. Hopefully the airplane was completely ready to go, but do you remember the airplane much? I mean, you might vaguely remember the airplane, or you might even know what kind it was or what airline you flew, but the airplane wasn't the thing. It was just the thing getting you to where you wanted to go. And then maybe you got to a hotel room. What color was the carpet in your hotel room? I'm almost positive you don't remember, because it's not important. What's important is what these things allow you to do. So this little bit of tech talk is just to encourage you to get out there even if your rig isn't ready yet. Because the rig being ready isn't the point. The point is getting out there and doing stuff. Unless you're somebody who just likes building rigs and traveling isn't your thing. One of the most accomplished magicians I knew, they called him the mechanic because he was mechanically perfect in all the magic tricks he did. Hated to perform. He would never show anybody any of the tricks he knew how to do. He just liked knowing how to do them and doing them well. If you're somebody like that and you just want to build out vans, well, heck, you should be a van builder and sell your vans after you build them. That's completely legit. But if you're a traveler, if you're an explorer, if you're somebody who wants to see stuff, don't let an unfinished van get in your way. Get out there. product review. I have been using these for a while now, and this is the Ring Stickup Cam. Now, Ring has a long history. Some guy started it, and I think he was on Shark Tank or whatever, but then Amazon bought it, and now it's a big thing. And these are small cameras that connect to the internet, and they're security cameras. There's a bunch of different companies that make these. I'm mostly familiar with the Ring ones, and the Ring Stickup Cam I like particularly in how it applies to van life. This is a can. This camera is the size of a small can, so it's smaller than a can of soda. Maybe one of those little V8 cans, a little bigger than that. And it comes in black and white. And it connects to the internet, and then it simply will detect movement and then send that to you on your phone. So it will send you video, it'll send you a still, it'll alert you. It's very good at that. And then you can talk to people through it. If like somebody crosses the bar, you can turn on the microphone and say, hey, what are you doing? You know, it has that kind of a thing. But what I really think sets it apart is that it has an incredibly long battery life. You no longer need to plug it in, don't even need a solar panel. The battery that comes with it is USB chargeable, and it can last as long as 6 months. So imagine you're parked somewhere and you want to keep an eye on the van. So long as you have an internet connection, you can take this can and put it in the woods looking at your van, or put it inside your van, or put it on the dashboard so you can kind of see inside and outside of the van. You can put it wherever you want, as long as nobody steals it. I mean, obviously you have to worry about that a little bit. And you will get notifications and alerts. Now, this requires two things. Obviously, you need the Ring Stickup Cam. That's the easy part. But it also requires an internet connection. And these connect to Wi-Fi. Now, you have to have a Wi-Fi connection for it to work off of. It can work off of, say, a phone's hotspot. It can work off just a hotspot. That's the way I do it. I have a hotspot from AT&T, and my Ring cameras go to that, and that is how I am getting the signal. You have to figure that part out. That is the tricky part. But once you figure that out, once you have internet at a place, these things work really, really well, and they last a really long time. Now, I have a link in the show notes. They're $100, but Amazon won't let me link to the super secret ones that are the refurbished ones. A lot of people buy these and can't get them to connect because they really only connect on 2.4 gigahertz, and some people only have 5 gigahertz networks, and that's a problem. So they send them back even though they're perfect. Amazon repackages them and sells them for $49. Same exact thing. It's only $49. Amazon will not let me link to that. But if you follow the link in my show notes and then just type in the word refurbished, you should be able to find the $49 ones. And I have 3 of them, and they work fine. So if you're looking for a security camera and you want a lot of support, which is what's nice about Ring, they have a big support network. They take it seriously. You can chat with them and everything. This is the way to go. Also, if you get a subscription for it, which I recommend, it can do things like take time-lapse, like it'll take a picture every hour, and you'll get free upgrades and all that kind of stuff. So do your YouTube research, check out the Ring cameras, see if you like them. But if you do, well, heck, I think they're pretty good, and for $49, they're really, really pretty good. Tales from the road. Way long ago, in 1984, I was 17 years old, and I started college. I started college a little early, not because I'm like super smart and skipped some grades or anything, but because I was born in December, and the way the school system worked, they put me with all the kids born in January, and so I was the youngest kid in class all the time, and I graduated high school at 17, so I started college at 17. And I went to a very strange college called Salem College in Salem, West Virginia. Yes, I'm from Salem, Mass., but this was Salem, West Virginia. And it's a very strange college. This college had existed for 100 years, but it really bloomed during Vietnam when all the kids went to college hoping to avoid the draft. And then when that ended, this college kind of diminished because it didn't have the population anymore, and it was in a rural West Virginia is not a normal place to go to college. So they had a strong nursing program, but they also had a whole lot of unusual majors. My major was Boy Scouts or Youth Agency Administration, which would teach you to be a Boy Scout executive or a Girl Scout executive or a Red Cross Youth Program administrator or whatever, 4-H, all that kind of stuff. My girlfriend's major was art therapy. And then there was an equestrian major. I had friends who were in that. And then there were several people who were heritage arts majors. These were folks who took courses on how to live the way people lived in the 18th century and to have all the skills those people had. And let me tell you, they had a lot of skills that we don't have today, including apothecary and bookmaking and dyeing and farming and woodworking and blacksmithing and being a farrier, which is different than a blacksmith. And yes, they had extensive courses in basket weaving. Yes, I know. Hilarious. Except my girlfriend took basket weaving, and I watched her go through the process, and holy cow, this is not what you think. Basket weaving, the way it's done at Salem College, or was, unfortunately this program doesn't exist anymore, started off with a walk in the woods until you found exactly the right size white oak tree, which you would then cut down, strip, and then very carefully, using a draw knife and a sawhorse made out of logs, cut into tiny, thin strips. And it was from these strips, which you would then treat, that you would make a basket. And at the end of the course, when you were done making your basket, it was worth several $100s. This was a fine level of handicraft and certainly nothing to be sneered at. Nobody who saw these finished baskets laughed about the basket weaving thing, I promise you. Now, I wasn't in this program, but I was intrigued by it. I mean, having grown up in Salem, Massachusetts, I was interested in history and museums and things like that. So they had a program for students who were just interested that they could go, and it was hang out. It was called the Fort New Salem Student Association. And we would go and hang out at the fort, as they called it. They had a bunch of old buildings kind of set up like a fort that they'd have festivals at. And actually, they taught the classes in these old log cabins. Not to get too much in the weeds, the college actually went out and took log cabins from old farms and developments and stuff. These cabins were about to be torn down, and the college took them and made a village out of them, which you can actually visit today. Fort New Salem is a tourist attraction in Salem, West Virginia. You can go there. I've talked about that before. Anyway, too much in the weeds. But as a part of being a student in this association, I got to participate in all these things and learn a little bit about them. And I was a tour guide when they had festivals, and I talked about apothecary and things like that. And I met some really interesting people. One of the people I met was a guy named Noel. And if you're familiar with Fort New Salem in the 80s, you absolutely know who Noel is. You also know who John Randolph is, and Noel and John Randolph were quite friendly at the time. But Noel seemed to take a shine to me, and I mentioned once that as I entered the tavern, which was one of the buildings, as I entered the door, I heard some funny things. Like, I heard voices that I couldn't place. Now, this could be called a paranormal event. Could I be hearing voices from the beyond? I mean, I don't know. I heard voices and I couldn't figure out where they were. Now, this building had a lot of weird walls, and it was surrounded by a bunch of buildings that also had weird walls. I don't know if there was somebody on another floor or around the corner or what. Or, heck, maybe it was somebody talking from beyond. I don't know. But I told this to Noel, who was kind of an administrator running the place, and he took a keen interest in me. He wanted to know more, and he talked about some people being sensitive to this kind of thing and all that. And, okay, whatever. I mean, as a young person, I had my dabbling with the paranormal and occult and playing with it, and especially living in Salem, where I was exposed to it more than perhaps most kids. But it wasn't long after this that I leaned more towards the skeptic side. But at this point, okay, I was open to these ideas. And Noel did something that made it so I will never forget him, ever. And that is, he gave me a book. He gave me the book, Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, by Annie Dillard. This book, which I think I've talked about before, is from 1974, and it's in the vein of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, except it is completely different. Because it's basically Annie Dillard just being outside in a meadow and talking about the things she sees and experiences. And this is not Joan Baez music and flowers and rainbow sunshine and all that. This is nature at its rawest. There is brutal stuff in this book talking about the beauty and ugliness of nature and how certain creatures have to sacrifice themselves for their children. I'll tell you this one story, and it's fairly horrible. There's a species of wasp that lays its eggs on caterpillars and then dies. That's not an uncommon pattern in nature. But if the wasp can't find the right caterpillar to lay her eggs on, her eggs will hatch inside her and start to eat her. So she has the choice of laying the eggs where she knows her children will just die. I mean, we're talking about insects here, so level of knowing can be debated. Or she can let her children live a little bit longer as they eat her alive, but not long enough to actually survive. That's the choice this wasp has to make, hopefully not knowing that they have to make this choice at all, because, heck, it's a wasp. But that's the kind of stuff this book has in it. I mean, I love this book. It's fascinating, it's in-depth, and it fills me with a sense of wonder and everything. But the reason I'm telling you this story is because of what Noel wrote inside the book. It's the first time I had heard this sentiment. And it's still here, and I have the actual book in my hands. It says, "To Jeff, it is better to travel than to arrive. Fondly, Noel." Because of that, I will never get rid of this book. And I have actually gotten rid of most of my books. They take up too much space. I would rather have a Kindle these days. But this one I'm keeping the hard copy of, not only because I love the book, but also because I love that Noel gave this to me. And though we didn't maintain a friendship over the years or anything like that, he impacted my life for no reason other than he wanted to do something nice. I think. Some have suggested that he had another motive. I don't know. It was not fulfilled no matter what. But Noel, I seriously doubt you're listening to this podcast, but thank you for the book. It definitely had a positive impact on my life. And heck, maybe telling this story may have a positive impact on your life as a listener, especially if you pick up this book. The audiobook is coming out in August, by the way. It's been 50 years, and they're finally releasing the audiobook, and I will definitely get a copy. I'll probably do a review of it. But the name of the book is Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard. I'll have a link in the show notes. A place to visit. Oh, I shouldn't do this as a place to visit. I should do this as a tale from the road because it's both. But anyway, I'm just going to give you the place to visit because we're running a little bit short of time. In Portland, Maine, the real Portland, to me, because I'm from the Northeast, there's a very unusual museum. It's called the Cryptozoology Museum. And you can find more about it at cryptozoologymuseum.com. Now, it's moving to Bangor. Oh, I said it wrong, didn't I? Sorry, Maynes. In 2005. But for now, it's still in Portland. And it's run by a man named Loren Coleman. Now, Loren Coleman is somebody that I've been aware of for a lot of my life. He has written or co-written a lot of the cryptozoology books. Like a lot of the books about Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, etc., 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 he has written. And he actually has a museum of evidence for cryptids. And cryptids are animals that are kind of hiding. So any kind of animal or monster that you've heard of but science doesn't recognize, that's a cryptid. And Loren has a museum of all these things. And he has some really cool stuff in his museum. He has a Fiji mermaid, for example, which was a gaff from Barnum and Bailey. He has the pteranodon or pterodactyl from that old photo that went around the internet like 15 years ago of Civil War soldiers posing in front of a pterodactyl. He has all kinds of little things. And I disagree with Loren about almost everything. When I visited his museum quite a while ago now, I actually ran into him. He was at the museum, and he knew Randy and James Randi, the amazing Randy, and I worked for him. And so we had a long conversation. He knew Joe Nickel and Ben Radford and all these other people I know who have written about cryptids, talked for it about whatever. And bottom line is we just didn't agree on a whole lot. Some of the stuff I thought was absolutely the most silly thing in the world he believed in, and some of the stuff I thought had more credibility he didn't believe in. It was fine. The museum was interesting to visit, regardless of whatever your opinions are of cryptids, and you will at least get to take your picture with a gigantic, lifelike Bigfoot. I have mine. You can get yours, and what the heck? Go see something different. You know, And it's a little museum. I like little museums. Supporting little museums is a good thing. So while Loren and I disagree on a lot of things, I think you should go visit his museum if you're ever up in Portland, Maine. And it is the Cryptozoology Museum, available at cryptozoologymuseum.com. I will have a link in the show notes. Resource recommendation. With all this talk about survival and the end of the world and cryptids and all this, I figured, you know what you need for a resource now these days? A book on how to stay alive in the woods. This book is a classic now. It came out, almost 25 years ago. And the name of the book is How to Stay Alive in the Woods, a complete guide to food, shelter, and self-preservation anywhere. And it's written by Bradford and Gier. Definitely a good book to throw in the back of your van, but also a good book to kind of put on the back of your toilet and actually read. I've read through a lot of these books. Some of them get way too technical or talk about these incredibly elaborate things you're supposed to do. This one is much more practical, and it focuses largely on the psychology of surviving in the woods, because it is ultimately all about psychology. You need to know the practices, but your mindset is what's going to keep you safe. And any of these stories you hear about people lost in the woods who get found or don't get found, almost always the ones that get found are the ones who had the right mindset. So if you're worried about the future and you think you might have to live in the woods for a while, this is a very good book to pick up. Again, it's called How to Stay Alive in the Woods by Bradford and Gier, and it's available brand new from as low as $15, or you can get it used for $2. At any rate, the link is in the show notes. Well, folks, thank you very much for listening to episode 218, as strange as it might have been. Music, as always, is by Simon Wagg. If you would like to get a hold of me, you can contact me at jeff@builttogo.com. That's 2 T's, not 3, not 1. Or visit us on our Discord server, or visit us at our Facebook group, all of which are linked at builttogo.com. Until next week, remember the words of Isaac Marion, who said, "Once you've arrived at the end of the world, it hardly matters which route you took."